Well, for all of you guys who just joined, my name is Nate Beckett. I'm one of the co-presidents of the Undergraduate Research and Internship Club. And we are so excited tonight to hear from Colin Muir, both a personal friend of mine and also a mentor. We lived nearby the last couple of years, and he graduated from BYU last year and now is in his first year in a PhD program in molecular and cellular physiology at Stanford University, which is awesome. That's a prestigious place to get into. And he's going to talk to us about his journey tonight and how that all worked out. So we're really excited to hear from him. This meeting is going to be recorded so that we can hopefully put on our club website so that people can look back and learn from this. So I don't have anything else, but Colin, we're really excited to hear from you. So I'll turn the time over to you.
Okay, awesome. Great. Thank you, Nate. I will go ahead. I have some slides prepared, so I'll go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. It is not letting me share my screen. Is there a way you can turn that on for me, Nate?
Yeah, Matt Mello will get that for you.
Okay, great.
Sorry, thanks for your patience on that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, it should be good now.
Okay, cool. Let's see. I've got a bunch of screens. PowerPoint, there it is. All right, can you all see my screen? Cool. Great, and you guys are seeing like my presentation, not my like presenter's notes and all that, right?
Yep, just the PowerPoint.
Okay, cool. All right, sweet. Okay, so my talk that I'm giving tonight is titled How to Get into a Top Graduate Program. I'll start by telling you all a little bit about me. I'm Colin Muir. I studied biochemistry at BYU, and like Nate said, I graduated last year. While I was at BYU, I worked in the Anderson lab, and I see Riley's on the call tonight, and Riley's in that lab now. It's a good one. And yeah, that was a great experience for me that definitely played a big part in me getting into Stanford and deciding to do a PhD. Another part of my life is I served a mission for my church in Mexico City. It was the greatest. Got a little picture with Elder Oaks there, which is kind of fun. He's a funny guy when he's not in conference laying down the law. Let's see. In my free time, I love to be outside. You can see being in Utah was just awesome, getting down into southern Utah and all the different places there. And now that I've graduated, I'm here at Stanford, and this is my first year that I've been out here, and I've been really enjoying it so far. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. One disclaimer is that I speak for myself, not for Stanford or any admissions committee. And things may vary from school to school and from department to department, even within a school. But I'll share what I've learned from my experience and what worked for me. And I hope you guys will feel free to stop me to ask any questions throughout my presentation. So I wanted to preface everything I say by kind of, I don't know if I need to convince you that you want to go to a school like Stanford or another top school, but I think there are a lot of good reasons why it is worthwhile. One reason is that there are facilities present at top research institutions that just aren't available for research at other places. And to kind of give you like an anecdote, like from my own research in structural biology, I'll tell you about some reasons that like Stanford was a good place for me. For one, there is a facility called a synchrotron that for solving protein structures, there's a technique called X-ray crystallography, where you are able to crystallize a protein down into a crystal and then shoot it with a beam of X-rays to then, you can take the information that comes from that to solve the structure of the protein. These synchrotrons, there's only a handful of them in the United States. Stanford happens to have one. And that's very convenient to not have to ship your samples out to different places across the country. There's a technique called cryo-electron microscopy. It won the Nobel Prize in 2015, And it has revolutionized the field of structural biology. But the microscope you need to do it costs several $1 million, and it's been severely limiting as to who can have access to be able to do this kind of research. For example, like the University of Utah recently got one of these microscopes, and it's allowed them to do a lot of cool research. Stanford has 6 or 7 at their disposal that they can use. And so it just shows you there are a lot of kinds of research that you can do at Stanford very easily that at another place that doesn't have these facilities, you just couldn't use the techniques necessary to ask certain kinds of scientific questions. There are faculty at Stanford and other top institutions that are amazing. I'll talk about the department that I'm in. I'm in the molecular and cellular physiology department, and the 3 guys on the left are all 3 of them are Nobel Prize winning scientists. On the left is Brian Kobilka, who got the Nobel Prize for his work on GPCRs. In the middle is Stephen Chu, who was the Secretary of Energy in the for the Obama administration and also has the Nobel Prize in physics. Tom Sudoff is the 3rd guy on the right, that he won the Nobel Prize in medicine for his work on vesicle trafficking, and he's a brilliant neuroscientist. I wanted to include a woman as well because there, you have these 3 Nobel Prize winning scientists. In my department, there are like 15 professors, and 3 of them have Nobel Prizes, which to me is just unreal. Getting to listen to these guys talk about their Nobel Prize winning science is amazing. Like Steve Chu, I'll listen to him give a talk, and he talks about, figuring out the mechanisms of dynein in these molecular motors, and he talks about things going backward and forward in time. I don't know. It's unreal. Carolyn Bertozzi is the woman on the far right. She's the director of the ChemH Institute at Stanford, which is kind of like this interdisciplinary research conglomerate, but the idea is pulling together all these different kinds of science to then benefit human health. And I can only describe her as a scientific rock star. She is not a Nobel laureate, but is pretty much always listed as someone expected to win a Nobel Prize at some point. So we'll see what happens with her. So anyway, being able to interact with and learn from and work with these faculty is amazing. At a top institution like Stanford, you can go after the big scientific questions. Science is competitive, and when you're going after these big questions that lots of people are interested in, there's an element of, if someone else finds the answer to what you're looking for before you do, you get scooped and you kind of get hung out to dry. And so, at these big institutions that are well funded and that have all of the resources, it's easier to go after the big questions that end up being the most impactful. You also have networking opportunities, whether you want to go into academia to become a professor and you get a connection to get into a lab for a good postdoc, or if you want to go into industry and work at a company like Genentech or Novartis. There are so many networking opportunities. I took a class called Drug Discovery and Neuroscience from the guy that was the head of the neuroscience department at Novartis. And if you're not, Novartis is a massive international pharmaceutical company, and he invited basically all of his contacts. So in those were the head of the research department of Novartis came and spoke to our class, and gave us his personal email and said, if you guys have any questions or want to talk about something, just shoot me an email. The kinds of connections to these amazing high-powered people that I've gotten to get as I've just been in my first year at Stanford has been awesome. So that's my spiel as to why going to a place like Stanford or another top school is worth your time and the effort necessary to do it. Okay, so that leads me to the question is, what do I need to do to get in? And real briefly, I think to list them all, it's good grades, research experience, letters of recommendation, and networking. I think those are probably the most important things that you can focus on in order to have a strong application to get into grad school. And so I'll kind of go through each of these things. And again, feel free to stop me if you have any questions along the way. Grades, I don't want to spend too much time talking about grades. You do need good grades to get into a place like Stanford, but you don't need perfect grades. I had about it was a 3.92 GPA is what I had. But I know that there are people who have had perfect GPAs. I have a friend who had a perfect GPA who did not get accepted to any of the top grad schools. What they will most likely do is use some kind of GPA cutoff to thin out the number of applications that they have to read through. And so with GPA, I'd say it's kind of like a box you have to check so that they will take a serious look at your application. From there, I would say research experience is probably the most important thing that you can have. And I would recommend getting as much research experience as you possibly can. The more, the better. The fact that you guys are at BYU is a really good thing because I think as an undergrad institution, BYU really encourages professors and students to create lots of research opportunities for undergraduates. And so, at least in my experience, I was able to get research experience pretty early on when I reached out for it. So as far as your research experience, you don't need to necessarily plan your whole project and do it all independently. But they want you to be more than just a technician. You need to be able to talk about your research in a way that shows that you actually understand the bigger picture of what's going on in your project. And so it's one thing to be able to say, okay, I did PCR, or I did these nitty gritty details of my experiment. And it's another thing to be able to say, okay, this is the kind of question that we were trying to answer. This is how it fits into the broader picture of the field we're working in. Those are the kinds of things you want to be able to think about and talk about as you're applying to grad school. One thing I recommend is doing one summer of research at a place other than BYU. And I'll tell you a little bit about why I think that's important and how to do it. So for a summer internship, there are plenty of formal internships for undergraduates. Let's see. Plenty of formal internships for undergraduates to get involved with research at top schools during the summer. Actually, I'm going to actually see if I can't. I have a link to a document that I made a while back where I just went and tried to find links to as many formal internship formal internships as I could. So I'm going to find the chat if I can and paste that in there. Okay, I pasted that in there. Let me know if that works.
Yeah, the link came through.
The link goes through? Okay, perfect. That's just a resource I've put together. So plenty of ways to get involved with research. I'll give you just a quick spiel of why I think doing a summer internship is important. One, for some of the same reasons that going to a place like Stanford is amazing, I just got to get a taste of that. I got to do kind of the high level research going after the really big, tough questions. I got to see research done at the higher level of I was in, and there's lots of really good research that happens at BYU. But I got to be in a lab that had no funding limitations where, it was just postdocs that were from all these, top places that were all so experienced in all their different fields. To me, it opened my eyes to research in a way that I hadn't seen before. I'll say, okay. And so that is one reason why it was important for me. There are networking reasons as far as getting into grad school that are also important. And I'll talk more about that later. So these formal internships are especially good opportunities for those who are from a group or minority that is traditionally underrepresented in science. A lot of them are specifically, encouraging people from underrepresented groups to apply. And these formal internships can become very competitive. And so I think they're worth applying to. There are other routes to do a summer internship, though, and the route that I took to do mine was to look for a summer student position. Now, a summer student position is informal. It's not, and it's something that is common at many higher end research institutions. So large labs with big budgets will oftentimes take on undergraduates as summer students for a variety of reasons. For me, I did a summer student position at Stanford, and the postdoc that I worked with had a visa such that there was a mentorship requirement. And so in order to keep his visa going, he needed to be mentoring undergraduates. And so there was a reason that, okay, he needed to take on a student. Another thing that can help incentivize a professor to take on, an informal summer student would be that if you're considering a gap year between your undergrad and graduate school, which is, I'll say, is very common among people interviewing. When I was kind of on the interview circuit at, I interviewed at Caltech, UC San Francisco, and Stanford, which are, three of the top schools for, biological sciences. And of the people that I interacted with, it was I would say more than half of them had taken time to work as a technician between finishing their undergrad and applying to graduate school. So a very common path. That wasn't my path. I finished my undergrad and then went right into graduate school. But that's a good opportunity for a lot of people. And so if you're doing that gap year, a PI will often train the summer student and then invite them back for the next year as a technician, right? Because they train you, you learn the techniques in the lab over the summer, and then you can produce a lot of work during your year as a technician. And that's, the professor will get a lot more out of you that way. And so for the best way to get a summer student position, in my experience, is to email many professors and ask whether they have openings for the summer. So what I did is I found I looked through the website of the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, HHMI. And so that's, for those of you who don't know, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute is a very large funding agency that gives some of the most prestigious funding you can get as a scientist. If you get this, you have millions and millions of dollars to spend every year for your research, and your lab will not hurt for money for those 7 years that you have HHMI funding. And so I emailed a bunch of these professors, and I started off trying to send emails to these professors and let them know that I was really interested in their research, and I would try to read their papers, because I was just cold emailing these people. They had no connection to me. But what I learned is that a lot of professors are so busy and they get so many emails every day that I took all this time to try to read, what the research they were doing. And then I would just get no reply, and I wasted a lot of time that way. And so eventually I just started sending, like almost like batch emails. I started emailing as many people as I could. I knew I wanted to go to a place I wanted, like Stanford and Harvard were the places I decided I wanted to go to. And so I just found as many professors with large, well-funded labs that I could, and then just emailed those people and said, I've seen you do research in this. Here's my resume. At that point, I had done about a year of research. And so I had, some techniques that I was familiar with in the lab, and, I could show, okay, hey, I can contribute meaningfully if you take me on as a summer student. And, do you have any openings for a summer student? And so for me, that worked out really well. I through these cold emails that I sent out to lots of different professors, I probably emailed 40 or 50 professors. Only 2 of them responded, but the 2 of them that did both offered me a spot. And so I got to choose between going to Axel Brunger's lab at Stanford and Stephen Libralis at Harvard. Both of them are HHMI professors. And so I chose to go to Axel Brunger's lab, which for me was just, the research seemed more interesting, and I had family around Stanford and kind of always had wanted to go to Stanford. And so for me, it just was the one that made sense. I received excellent mentorship from a postdoc in the Brunger lab. Yeah, my experience was that summer student experience was what helped me decide to do a PhD. I was thinking about doing medical school or doing an MD PhD. And for me, when I did research in the Brunger lab, it kind of opened my eyes to, for some reason, I was able to really fall in love with the research. I think this postdoc really took me under his wing and helped me go through scientific papers one-on-one in a way that I hadn't done before. That was really just it was just what I needed. I made connections throughout the Stanford community, and I got a strong letter of recommendation from a well-known professor. Basically, everyone in the world of structural biology knows the name of Axel Brunger. And so at different schools that I was applying to, I knew that his letter of recommendation was going to mean a lot to the people reading it. And I think it opened a lot of doors for me. So on that note, I'll go to letters of recommendation. In my experience, top programs will not invite you to an interview without 3 strong letters of recommendation. 1 weak letter could be enough to have your application eliminated. So if you've worked in multiple labs, which is one reason that I think doing a summer student position is really helpful, letters from the PIs are the best. And so I would say that few people have worked in more than 2 labs. And that makes the 3rd letter writer the hardest and maybe the most important one to decide. And so I would just really recommend that you spend time developing a relationship with a professor one-on-one for that 3rd letter writer. If you don't have 3 professors that you've done research with. For me, I had my 3rd letter from Dr. Wood in the biochemistry department, and I took his class. And what I did is I participated very, pretty actively in his class, but then also after class, outside of hours, I would go in and ask him questions about the things that he'd been teaching. And I'd ask him questions about just doing research and his experiences with teaching. We'd have pretty long talks, and we got to be pretty close. He also judged the BYU student research competition. And he was one of the judges that saw me present my research. And so he ended up having a lot of different things that he could write about in this letter of recommendation that he wrote for me. And so I think that's the thing you want to avoid, is having a letter where, the person can tell, okay, this person took a class and then walked up at the end and their only interaction was, hey, can you write me a letter of recommendation? So yeah, that's something I would recommend thinking about early on is, okay, what professors do I seem to get along with, and how can I put in the time to develop a relationship with them so that they know me well enough that they can write a strong letter.
Hey, Colin, can I ask you a quick question on that one?
Yeah, for sure.
Do you think it's important that the 3rd professor is related to the field of the PhD that you want to get into, or does it matter? Can it be a professor related to a different subject? What's your thoughts on that?
I think it doesn't necessarily matter what subject they're in, but they should be able to write to the fact that you are a person who, they should be able to write something that, the admissions committee is going to find important, right? So they should be able to talk about, maybe if you are really good at teaching, or or if they can talk about, okay, I've seen him present and has these leadership skills. Like, yeah, I think those kinds of things will be useful, definitely. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, as I said, a letter from a professor you didn't interact with them probably won't be strong enough to get you into the top program. The personal statement is one of the important parts of an application to grad school. Let's see how I'm doing on time. Okay. And so, this is kind of like a pretty specific thing to grad school applications, but the style is something that I wasn't familiar with. I tried to write it like, like a fancy book or something, but a personal statement is that it's direct, and it's like, hey, I want to be, tell them this is my goal. This is how I'm going to do it. This is why I want to come to your school. And let me tell you about all the research I've done. And I think that's the most important thing they want to hear. They're not looking for like a, lengthy personal anecdote that's like, I don't know, some like literary devices and things like that. Like they're not looking for that as much as, just straightforward scientific writing. Yeah, the purpose of it is you want to show your research experience and let them know that you can, you have, right, that you have thought about your research and that you are more than just like a technician doing what you're supposed to do, but you have actually some scientific thinking capacity. Yeah, and so focus on what you did for the research and telling the whole scientific story of your project. And I had, my professor and the postdoc that I worked with when I was at Stanford, I talked about both of those scientific projects in my personal statement, and I had them look over it and give me some feedback to make sure that, okay, am I explaining the big picture of the science well? Am I, getting the details of the science that I did well? Okay, networking. So this is one I wasn't really quite familiar with, but I think is very important. Top programs want to increase their yield, which is the percentage of students that actually, let's see, yeah, it's the percentage of students that actually accept an offer of admission. So they want to minimize the number of people they accept and then go to a different school, right? And so the way they do that is they want to see that, okay, this person really cares about Stanford or Harvard or whatever school it is. They want to feel like, okay, we're their number one choice. And so let's see. Yeah, so they highly prioritize students who have demonstrated interest in their program. I'd say the best way to demonstrate that kind of interest is to reach out to the professors and students within that program to ask about their research, the culture of the program, and other things. And so what that looked like for me is like, for example, I mean, with Stanford, it was easy because I had done a summer student position there and in my personal statement, I could write, I want to come to Stanford because I want to work with people like Axel Brunger and like Liang Feng he's one of the professors that I've now rotated with, but I sat in his office and talked to him about his research, and they could see, okay, this guy actually knows the people in our department, and he's serious. He's taken the time to figure out who the people are here. There's a big difference between that and something where it just feels like it could have been any, generic statement sent out to any number of schools. At Caltech, I went and I visited their campus and talked to Grant Jensen, who now is at BYU, which is awesome because he's the man. And Grant Jensen was, I talked to him, and then I emailed another professor and said, hey, I'm going to be at Caltech and your research looks really interesting to me. Can I meet with you? And she said, oh, I'm actually going to be out of town, but I'm CCing my admin for my lab, and she'll connect you with some of the grad students, and so you can talk with them while you're here. And so while I visited the campus, there were, several grad students who, showed me slides of what their research was. They took me around the lab and told me all about their experience in Caltech. And so in my personal statement, I could write about that and say, I've come and visited the campus. I've talked with Grant Jensen. I've talked with grad students from this lab. And from that visit, I know that the culture at Caltech is something that I want. And that's why I want to come here. Right. And that was a really strong personal statement that I think got me in. And so you can do that with any school you want to get into, right? It's the skill of learning to send a cold email to some stranger professor, and just learning that, okay, like people are open to that, and most people are pretty open to trying to be helpful and share their research with interested and motivated students. So yeah, with that, I'll end. Thanks for listening. And do you guys have any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Colin. That was awesome and super helpful. Yeah, anybody have a question for Colin?
I have a quick question, Colin.
Yeah.
You mentioned how you came across a lot of people in graduate programs who had switched or they had taken a gap year before they started. Would you say that's because they didn't get in on their first round, or that was a purposeful decision to take a gap year?
I think a lot of people, it was just the decision that they had made. Like I can think of several, like my program is small. There's only 2 people in my cohort. And the other guy in my cohort, he worked with a professor at UCSF for 2 or 3 years. That was just what he decided to do. There are people who just didn't get in their first round and then reapply. So I think it's a very good kind of like backup thing to do. For me, I decided to just apply. I figured, okay, I've already got the research experience. I'll do it. I was thinking of doing the gap year anyway, and then it went great, and I got into 3 amazing schools. And so I just went, because the PhD is a long road, right? And so for me, I felt like I want to get on that path as quick as I can. But I think there is also a lot to be said for taking a break. PhD is hard work. And I've had lots of grad students say, like, okay, gap year wouldn't be a bad thing, get a little rest before the storm that is grad school. So yeah, to each their own.
Absolutely. Thank you. I imagine with a mission, you're very keen to get started as well, already
Right.
behind.
Sure.
Colin, so could you just say, just briefly, what you would, I know you mentioned it, but again, what you would say when you'd email people cold, like those professors, you know, as a BYU student who, like, yeah, how did you convince them to give you their time?
Yeah, I just sent a lot of short emails, and I just said something like, Dr. So-and-so, my name's Colin, and I'm a biochemistry student at BYU. I've recently learned about your research in such and such, and I'm really interested in working in your lab. I'm, curious if you have any positions open for summer students. And that was pretty much the extent of what I'd say. And I'd say I have attached my resume or CV with, that highlight my qualifications for a summer student position, basically showing, okay, I've done lab work. You won't have to like teach me how to hold a pipette. Like I'll be able to get something done while I'm there, because there are a lot of people who, who do not have that kind of experience. And so I think that was helpful for me. But I think at the end of the day, it's just I had to reach enough people to find the few professors that were actually like, oh yeah, like I do want a summer student for such and such postdoc. And so I think getting out the critical mass of emails was the most important thing.
No, that's awesome. Super helpful. Go ahead, Riley.
Sorry, I was just going to ask, when in your undergrad did you do your summer? Was it in between your junior and senior year?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And I think that was a good time to do it, because I'll say my plan actually at the time was to do a gap year, because I was thinking I was going to apply it to MD PhD, and there's like, MD PhD is so intense that I felt like, okay, I need to do the gap year to be competitive. And so, the 2 professors that I was talking to, they both were curious of, are you going to do a gap year? Right. And so I think I could see how much they perked up when I told them, I'm like, would you be open to me coming back and working as a technician in your lab? Right. Because for them, that's the moneymaker, because that's like, okay, I can have someone well-trained and that can do a lot of like important research for me over the course of a year. And someone that, maybe they'll even end up joining my lab. Like the Brunger lab that I did my summer student position in, I'm now rotating, or I rotated last quarter in that lab, and I may join it for my PhD work. And so that's one of the reasons that, I think smart professors know, like, okay, we can, develop a relationship with the students we take on.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, that the summer student position, that's like my thing, that like, oh, that I honestly think that was the game changer for me, like being able to do that, and just knowing that was a thing I could do, that I could just cold email people that I had never talked to before and get a job offer. That was very empowering. So
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I hadn't really thought about that, so that's super useful.
Yeah.
Great. Well, unless anybody else has any other questions, speak now if you do. But thank you so much, Colin. That was awesome. Super helpful information, and it was really nice for you to make a presentation and take your time out of your busy PhD program to do that. I think all of us have gained a lot of insight as to what we could do to prepare for that. And yeah, we're really grateful to have you. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah. Happy to share my experience with you, and thank you guys.
Well, good luck going forward. We're excited to see where you keep going. Thanks everybody, and have a great night.
Okay.